I believe that we will be back on the moon in about 3 years. It will be a historic moment. I hope it will be an inspirational moment to show what we can do as a civilization that musters our energies to something good.
I'm Jeremy Hobson, and this is the follow-up. That's our weekly podcast you can only get here on the Middle Podcast feed. And we are following up today on our show about whether humans should be trying to settle in space, on the moon or on other planets. NASA just announced a $20 billion project to get astronauts back on the moon before the end of President Trump's term and to establish a permanent moon base. And billionaires like Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos are also putting money and resources into establishing a human presence on the moon or even Mars. And many of you had thoughts about this. We're going to hear more of them as we welcome our guest, Jeff Foust, who covers space policy at SpaceNews. He's also got a PhD in planetary sciences from MIT and a bachelor's in geophysics and planetary science from Caltech, which is all to say that I think we're in good hands right now with this topic. Jeff, it's great to have you here.
Thanks. It's a pleasure to be on.
Well, and you are actually joining us from the Kennedy Space Center in Florida. So if a rocket goes off in the background, we'll forgive you for that. What are you covering there?
I am here at the Kennedy Space Center for the launch of Artemis II. This is a NASA mission that will send 4 astronauts around the moon. It will be the first time that they've put astronauts on board this particular spacecraft called Orion, launched on a rocket called the Space Launch System. Orion and SLS were tested back in 2022 without people on board. This is the next step to demonstrate that they can safely carry people, and it's all part of NASA's broader Artemis program to return astronauts to the moon.
Why is there such a focus on the moon right now?
That's a great question. There are a lot of reasons. Some of them are scientific. Some of them are, the potential industries, businesses that could be enabled by based on the moon. A lot of it is also geopolitical. China has made it clear that they intend to send people to the moon with a landing around the end of the decade. And although the United States landed people on the moon more than 50 years ago with the Apollo program, there's a desire to get humans back on the moon before China lands its first astronauts there as a demonstration of American will and American power, if you will.
But what are you hearing from people in the space industry about this? Are they excited by that, or would they rather NASA and others focus on going farther afield, going out to Mars, going to other planets, going deep into the solar system to try to at least take pictures of things?
Well, there's a fairly extensive program of robotic missions that are exploring the solar system and have been for many years. So NASA has been the world leader in sort of studying the solar system with these robotic spacecraft. In terms of sending humans, there have been some people who would rather have NASA go directly to Mars.
Mm-hmm.
There's obviously a lot of interest in going there. It's just very, very challenging to do it. It's very difficult to go back to the moon even.
Right.
I think there's a growing consensus that the moon is a good stepping stone towards Mars. It's just a few days away rather than 6 to 9 months away, which would be the case for a Mars mission. If something goes wrong, you can come back in a few days. If something goes wrong on Mars, it may take a year or more to get back. So there's reasons to go to the moon, test the technologies, the life support systems, the various things that we would need eventually for Mars, do that at the moon. And once we've tested that and feel much more confident in that, then go and send people to Mars.
Well, let's get to some of the comments from our listeners about this. We got so many calls and so many voicemails. And one of the issues that we talked about was the environmental cost of launching all of these rockets. Listen to this.
Hi, this is Mary from Fruita, Colorado. My very concrete and very firm answer is no, 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 no. We've already completely ruined the planet that we have now, which is a miraculous entity. And until we can restore this planet to balance for all, we need to stay away from other planets. Exploration, maybe. Space exploration is fine, but landing and living there, I would say no. We've done horrific things to our planet here. And in addition, we have also screwed up our stunning night sky with so much light pollution and so many satellites that average people can't even get a look at this amazing canopy over us.
So, Jeff, this came up a lot, the environmental costs of all these rocket launches, and also just sort of like the state of our own planet. Maybe people just want to have an escape hatch and go somewhere else. But what do we know about the environmental costs?
It's true that there are environmental impacts of space activities, just as there are to almost any human activity. The impacts from space activities are certainly much less than other fields. For example, commercial aviation. We don't hear most people say that because of the environmental impacts of aviation, we should stop flying planes. The issue is that we don't fully understand, though, a lot of the potential environmental impacts of the increase in space activity. Launches create emissions that place chemicals in the upper atmosphere that can affect atmospheric chemistry. Likewise, satellites that re enter at the end of their lives can deposit materials in the atmosphere that might also affect atmospheric chemistry. So, those are still areas of study. They should be looked at to better understand the impacts. But I think we should be careful of assuming that just because we see a big increase in the number of launches, it will result in serious environmental impacts.
Although, are people having those discussions right now? You say we don't know enough, but it could be that we dramatically increase the number of launches in the next few years. Are people talking about that?
People are talking about it. There is some research going on to try and better understand what happens when you deposit more of these chemicals, whether they're the emissions from rockets or whether they're the metals from satellites that burn up in the upper atmosphere, to see how that might affect atmospheric chemistry, how it might affect, for example, the ozone layer, or how it might affect the warming of the upper atmosphere through greenhouse gas effects. So those are open areas of study. But the level of space activity is still, even though there's been a significant increase, is still a tiny fraction of what we see in, say, commercial aviation.
Okay, well, let's listen to another perspective. Listen to this caller.
Hello, Jeremy. I'm Kane. I'm from Northern Illinois. I'm 17 years old. I did always think about going to space, but the older I get, it kind of gets like a worrisome feeling because I have too much comfort in the home I've become like attached to. But if I ever did get the opportunity to go to outer space and live on Mars, I would have to think about it a lot because I don't know if I want it more than my home.
So interesting, Jeff. And I have to say, I just saw Project Hail Mary, the movie that just came out about Ryan Gosling going deep into space. Brings up some of the same questions. It's dangerous for people to go there for long periods of time. It could be a one-way ticket. And I guess a question that came up that I'd like to ask you is, why send humans when we can just send robots?
Well, there are a couple of answers to that. One is that humans are still far more effective than the very best robots. Even in an era of advancing technologies and increasing use of artificial intelligence, there's nothing quite like human intelligence, and the human hand and the human eye and the ability to be able to observe and you know intuit and inspired by what's going on, and make advances that it takes much longer for robots to do. The Mars rovers are an excellent example of that. We've had several rovers on Mars. We have a couple that are operating right now, Curiosity and Perseverance. They have been, in the case of Curiosity, on the surface for more than a decade, and Perseverance has been on the surface for 6 years. They've traveled a few tens of miles. You can imagine, even a human walking in a spacesuit would be able to walk that distance in a much shorter period
Right.
of time, and have the ability to immediately stop and look around if they see something that looks unusual, and examine it in closer detail. So I think part of it is simply that humans are still better than robots. They're obviously, we're much more expensive than robots. It takes a lot to keep us alive and well in space. There are risks, as you mentioned. There are dangers in that, just as there are in various other fields of human endeavor. So I don't think it's unusual in that respect that we have to deal with risks like that. But the other thing is that we as humans want to explore on our own.
Mm.
When we take a vacation, we want to go somewhere and experience something for ourselves. We don't want to sit at home, and put on a VR headset and see the Grand Canyon. We want to go to the Grand Canyon. We want to see it with our own eyes. Maybe we want to hike down the Grand Canyon and back up and just take in that experience. Um, Obviously, it'd be much easier if we just sat at home and put on an Oculus headset and did that. But we want to do things ourselves, and we want to be there. And I think that's one of the reasons why it makes sense for humans to go beyond Earth is that experience of being there just simply can't be replicated with robots alone.
Well, I think we now have our headline for this podcast and for all of the social media posts about it, which is Jeff Foust says humans are still better than robots. Yes.
Yes, that is a controversial opinion I will stand by.
Okay, good. Well, stand by because in a minute we're going to talk about the billionaires who are interested in a moon base, maybe a Mars base too. The follow up with Space News' Jeff Foust will be right back. Welcome back to the follow-up. I'm Jeremy Hobson. I'm joined by Jeff Foust of Space News, who's at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida. Jeff, let's talk about the billionaires. Elon Musk wanted to build a base on Mars. He's kind of backed off of that because it is so far away, and the closest point between the planets Earth and Mars only comes every 26 months or so. Now he's more focused on the moon, as is Jeff Bezos. Why did they want this so much?
Well, I think both Bezos and Musk were inspired by space as children. They saw the exploits of the early space age, including the Apollo landings on the moon, and they felt like the rate of progress had slowed down since the early space age. Obviously, we hadn't gone back to the moon since 1972. We haven't been to Mars at all yet. And so, as they went off into technology fields and e-commerce and areas like that, and became wealthy, they started looking at ways to take their own private wealth and try and do space differently. Try and apply some of the lessons from Silicon Valley and the technology field to space, and that's what you've seen with Elon Musk and SpaceX, and what you've seen with Jeff Bezos and Blue Origin. They have the ability to finance their companies on their own to at least some degree, at least to the point where they can start winning business from companies and government agencies and such. But they've been able to do it sort of on their own terms and to try and find a way to move more quickly. And I think you've definitely seen that with SpaceX, that they have gone from nothing 20 years ago to now the most prolific launch company in the world. They launch as much last year as the rest of the world combined. They can send astronauts to Earth orbit. They can put up a giant constellation of Starlink satellites for broadband services.
Mm.
We're seeing Blue Origin starting to develop a lot of these same capabilities as well. But I think it really started with a dissatisfaction with the rate of progress they had seen from government and from some of the big conventional aerospace companies, and a desire to move differently and to move faster.
Do you think that it's going to be private space companies or NASA or some other country that establishes a moon base first?
I think it will be probably a combination of NASA working with other space agencies in Europe and Japan and Canada and elsewhere, along with companies. It may well be a sort of a public-private partnership of what this moon base takes shape, because I think government agencies want to do research and technology development in a moon base, but I think companies may see some opportunities to do private research, or potentially, even habitats of some kind further down the road. But I think really what you'll see is a public-private partnership, which is the model that gave us, our ability to get to the space station right now with the Crew
Right.
Dragon spacecraft. It was SpaceX working with NASA. NASA provided funding, they provided technology support, but and they served as a anchor customer, if you will, for that service. But it's allowed SpaceX to sell that capability to other customers and
Yeah.
to build up that capability that probably would have been much more difficult to do solely on a private basis.
Well, still, many of our callers were skeptical about the billionaires and their intentions. Listen to this one.
Terrence calling from Minnesota. It's amazing that this question even has to be fielded because it's so obvious that planetary habitation outside the Earth is just ridiculous. I wish the NASA crowd and the Elon Musk would have to explain just what they are up to, what they want, moving to planets that are utterly desolate and inhospitable.
Utterly desolate and inhospitable. It does bring up an interesting question, which is like, if there was a planet out there in our solar system or somewhere that we could get to that was actually like better than Earth for humans, then that would be one thing. But we're talking about maybe going to, Mars, where it's like freezing cold. There's nothing there for us right now that we can tell. How do you answer that question?
There's a good point there in that Earth is by far the most hospitable place we know about, really in the universe. As to the best of our knowledge so far, even Jeff Bezos acknowledges that Earth is the best planet,
Mm,
and we want to be able to preserve that planet. But there are always going to be people who want to strike out and find opportunities elsewhere. And the moon and Mars are very hostile to life, but we may see benefits from having people working in those conditions. There may be capabilities, technologies that they develop there. There may be, in some cases, resources that can prove beneficial. So it will be difficult, and it won't be for most people. The idea that billionaires are doing this as sort of an escape hatch from the Earth doesn't make a lot of sense, because as bad as things may be on Earth, it's still going to be far, far better than the conditions on the moon or Mars. You really want to stay on Earth, but you want to find a way to make it better, and it may be a way to do so by
right.
leveraging the capabilities of space.
Well, and many of them, the billionaires, already have like great bunkers in Hawaii and stuff like that. So they're they're going to be fine in case of whatever happens. Let's listen to one more caller.
Hi there, this is Phil Chavez in San Antonio. What is a possibility that could happen many, many generations down the line if we do go to the moon, go to Mars, and end up reproducing in space? How that could affect politics, how people identify as groups. I personally am excited for humans to eventually go into space, but I do think it's too soon for us to be conversing with this. I think one of the first major scientific innovations that needs to happen before going to space is a way to synthesize gravity. But I read a lot of science fiction, so so who knows?
Synthesizing gravity, maybe, Jeff, something that would have to be done to keep us grounded on other planets. Are people working on stuff like that right now here on Earth, and how far along are they?
It's a great question, because one of the challenges of space flight is zero G, or sometimes you hear it called microgravity. It's We know that extended exposure to weightlessness is not good for the human body, and so we've learned over the years to take countermeasures like exercise. The astronauts who go to the space station will exercise a couple of hours each day in order to mitigate the bone and muscle loss that would come from weightlessness. So we're learning how to deal with that. One of the things we don't know is this idea of partial gravity. The moon's gravity is about 1/6 of the Earth's. Mars is about 1/3 of the Earth. We don't know if that's enough gravity to take care of those effects, or if people who live on the moon and Mars would have to do similar things like exercise to ward off the effects of reduced gravity. It's an area that people are just starting to look at. Likewise, some of the concerns from the caller about reproduction in space. Also is a lot of
Right.
unknowns. As you might imagine, that becomes a little difficult for NASA to start investigating human reproduction in space. It starts to become a sensitive issue. But
And yet,
down
and
the
yet it's
road,
so important. If you want to establish a colony on another planet, they have to be able to reproduce.
right. And it may end up being, some other agency or organization that takes the lead in that kind of research. But, you're correct. If we have a future where humans are living in space indefinitely, including having families there, it's something that we will have to study, and that may still be many decades off. But there's no reason to not at least start doing that research now to understand, at the very least, what we don't know, what we need to find out, and then determine how we can deal with that. It may turn out that the best way of living in space is space stations that sort of look like the one in 2001, that rotate to create gravity. So
Mm.
you can live in space but still have the same gravity on Earth, or close to the same gravity on Earth, so you don't have the deleterious effects of weightlessness or reduced gravity on the human body. Those are all still unknowns. We don't know. It may turn out that moon gravity, Mars gravity is just fine, but we have to do the research to find that out, and the time to start doing that research is now and not later.
Well, and one of the takeaways that I had from our show was how many callers were skeptical about the idea of colonizing other planets or even the moon. We think about space and space exploration as something that brings up wonder in people and curiosity and really inspires people. Do you think that space exploration right now, at this moment in 2026, with everything else that's going on, has lost some of its allure, or do you think that that's maybe not? Maybe people are just asking questions, but they actually would still rather see humans explore to the fullest extent?
Talking to a lot of people have making comparisons to 1968. All the traumatic events taking place in the world then, but we sent humans to the moon on Apollo 8 for the first time. And that was a symbol of hope. It was a symbol of what the best of humanity can do. And a promise of a future. And I think, in 2026, where we see all of the problems here again on Earth, different problems from 1968, but problems nonetheless, I think something like Artemis II can do something similar. It can demonstrate the best of our capabilities, provide a symbol, some inspiration of the future, show the good that we can do. And it sometimes gets lost because it's a very different media environment today. It's not just three television networks and some radio stations and newspapers, but we have a whole fractured media and social media environment. But I'm hopeful that something like this can break through, and that people can see this as a sense of wonder and inspiration, and again, sort of a positive signal of what humanity can do.
All right, Jeff. So everybody that comes on this podcast gets to make a prediction about anything. I'm very hopeful that you, as somebody who is looking at all this amazing stuff that's going on with space exploration, are going to give us a space-related prediction. So what is it?
Well, my prediction is that we will land humans back on the moon in 2029. And that's a year later than what NASA is talking about. But I have been around this enough to know that schedules slip. But I believe that we will be back on the moon in about 3 years, and I will be a historic moment. It will be a dramatic moment, and I hope it will be an inspirational moment to show again that, what we can do as a society, as a civilization, that musters our energies to something good.
That is Space News' Jeff Foust. Jeff, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you.
And thanks for listening to The Follow-Up. It was produced by Harrison Patino. Don't forget to subscribe to us on Substack. It's listentothemiddle.substack.com. I'm Jeremy Hobson, and I'll talk to you soon.